Okay, welcome to the May 12th edition of the Manhattan GMAT Study Hall. We are going to discuss today initial modifiers and their relationship to the following subject. But before we do that, as usual, we need to go ahead and start with the usual warnings about content, what to submit, what not to submit, because this week almost every single submission was in violation of these guidelines. So pay attention. First of all, please don't submit problems that are too general. I don't think a ton of people did this week, but you need to have something that we can go on. So you can't use like geometry as a whole, and you can't use, how do I solve problems faster? These are not things that we can answer in a decent amount of time in a study hall. But also, more importantly, people are doing this left and right. Please don't submit single problems outside of a context. If you do that, then please post them on the forum and not here. So don't post one problem without any sort of larger context. We'll see an example in a second. Finally, please don't submit personal issues. We have folders on the forums for that as well. So again, here's the address of the forum. If you have questions on specific problems, then search out the appropriate folder, math, verbal, etc. If you have a question about personal issues or study plans, then please search out the general questions folder. Finally, no OG problems. I understand this isn't written as explicitly as it should be on the front page of Thursdays, so I'm going to have them edit that. But we're not allowed to use problems from the official guide because we're not allowed to reproduce those problems on the screen. So that's a copyright issue. Like, you'll notice there are other resources out there that use OG problems. We have our OG companion. A couple of companies have OG discussions online. One thing you will notice that all of those resources have in common is that they cannot reproduce the OG problems themselves. So unfortunately, if we have an OG problem submitted, we're not allowed to put it on the screen. So we can't use them. So again, just to make sure, here are some submissions from this previous week. This person basically spent a lot of time. Unfortunately, that time was wasted because we're not allowed to use OG problems. This person posted a response here with like 5 OG problems referred in it. We can't use these. So if you're going to use problems like this, what you have to do is you need to make your own versions that are similar to it first and then submit those to us, please. So if you want to, it goes to the forums too. If you want to submit OG problems either here or on the forum, what you need to do is make your own analogy version first. So in other words, use the same structure but different content. You need to make your own sentence that's like the sentence that you see, but with different words in it. Also, please don't submit problems that are just problems. This is why we have forums. So, like, this is a submission from this past week. Someone's asking a really specific problem about a really specific CAT exam question. Please post these things on the forum. So, post these questions on the forum, please. If you're going to post specific problems, as we said before, what you need to do is have a general tie-in. You need to relate that to some more general question, because if it's a single problem, we already have a forum that is dedicated to such things. So please take those problems to the forum, post them there. This is not the place for that. So smiley face if you guys understand these two things in particular. Click the smiley face icon if you do. Okay. And also, please check the archives. We had a couple people ask questions about topics that have already been covered in depth. So we had one poster ask a question about defining variables in general word problems. That's already the subject of the December 17th session down here. We had one poster ask about strength and weaken questions. That's already the subject of the one of the April sessions of this year, and so on. So, I mean, we've done about 35 sessions already, so chances are lots of topics are in there already. So if you have a topic to suggest, also please check and see if it's been treated already. If it has, then when you submit it, if there's something that hasn't been covered, then please detail the differences. So if you submit a previously covered topic, please specify the difference in the way you would like to see it covered. Because one thing we don't really want to do here is basically repeat the content of previous sessions. So if you're looking for a different spin or a different emphasis on a topic we've covered, then that's fine, but you have to tell us that. Okay. Questions? Otherwise, give me a smiley face, and we will go ahead and start. Smiley face icon, or if you have questions, please type them in the text box. All right, let's take a look at the following. Who knows what's wrong with the following? I mean, it says sentences because there are more than one on the slide, but right now you can only see one. Text box, please. Who knows what is wrong with the sentence on this slide? Okay, yeah, a lot of you guys are nailing this, so good. A couple people said there's no subject, but there is a subject. So that's I mean, it is a complete sentence. But the issue is, in fact, before we talk about this, here's a quick question. What I'm going to do is put some polling tools in your boxes. Okay, what you'll see is if you look at the left-hand corner of the screen, then you'll notice the following. You'll notice this green check and red X. These are polling responses, yes, no. You'll notice this. Please respond with the following. Here's a question real quick. Is this sentence grammatically correct? Grammatically correct, give me a green check. If it's actually grammatically incorrect, give me a red X. Okay, most of you have responded. We're still waiting on a couple of you guys. Okay, here's the responses from the class. So most of you answered this correctly. The sentence is, in fact, grammatically correct. So there is an error in it, but it's not a grammar error. So let's talk about what is wrong with it. First, let's get all this stuff off the board. Okay. The sentence is not grammatically incorrect, but it's still incorrect. First of all, let's make sure we know how that can happen. Tell me in the text box, please. How's that possible in the first place? Like, how can a sentence be incorrect, but not grammatically incorrect? Yeah, I mean, remember that sentences have two aspects, which are, you can't really separate them from each other, but there's grammar and there's also meaning. And plenty of sentences are incorrect in the sense that they are then they don't mean the right thing, even though they are grammatically sound. Concision is not really an error, although concision is like a leading indicator of other errors. But all sentences that are wrong are either wrong in terms of grammar or wrong in terms of meaning. So this sentence it doesn't mean the right thing. So let's talk about it. This is an initial modifier. When you have modifiers that start with ing, they must actually describe the following subject. This is the rule. So coming home, when you have an initial modifier starting with ing, initial meaning it's at the start of the sentence. So there. When you have an initial modifier that starts with an ing construction, you have to be talking about the following subject. So in this case, coming home from school is talking about the wind. Notice that this is not a grammatical error. It's an error in the sense that it doesn't make any sense, because the wind doesn't go to school. So by the same token, it's illogical to say that the wind is coming home from school. Questions about this? Smiley face if this makes sense. Questions? Okay, remember that you shouldn't be trying to fix sentences for the most part, but let's talk about what version of this would be correct. The correct version would be if you have coming home from school. Who knows how you would fix the rest of that? Like, what has to be text box if you know? What has to be after this? You need to have I was. So, because you need to have the subject that was actually coming up from school. So, I was blown off my bike by the wind. So, notice that in this case, if you're going to use this modifier, you actually have to use a passive voice construction to make it work. So, because the only way to put I in the subject position here is to use the passive. Okay, so we've got that. Next example, what's wrong with this one? Text box, please. A couple of you are still typing, so I'll wait a little bit. Yeah, one person is typing no subject. I mean, it's not, no subject is not literally true. Because, I mean, the sentence does have a subject. But it depends on what you mean by that. Like, when you write no subject, if you mean that it has the wrong subject, then that's there. But if when you write no subject, if you actually mean no subject, then no, that's incorrect. Okay. What's happening here is you have an initial modifier thrown from a passing car. This kind of thing here, thrown, is what is called a past participle. If you don't know what past participles are, you may want to look that up with a Google search or other such tool. But this is what's called a past participle. There's another rule just like the first one that says when you have an initial modifier that starts with a past participle, same kind of restriction. So when you have an initial modifier starting with past participle, then that also must describe the following subject. So this is also an error because what was thrown from a passing car? Like what's supposed to be here? Text box, please. Yeah, you need to have a cigarette. Again, notice that like almost all modifier errors, these are not grammar errors. Like the vast majority of modifier errors are meaning issues and not grammar issues. Because again, this sentence is perfectly grammatically correct, but it's just kind of a stupid sentence. Like it implies that someone is enough of a comic book style champion that they can actually throw a blaze out of a car. Which is nice and funny, but it's not the intended meaning of the sentence. The intended meaning of the sentence is that a cigarette was thrown out of a car. So the correct version would be something like thrown from a passing car. We don't need to write that part again. A stray cigarette ignited the blaze. Smiley face, if this makes sense. Questions, type them in the text box, please. Okay, here's the third one. What's wrong with this sentence? Yeah, you've got a survivor of the Holocaust. So again, we got to figure out what the deal is here. When your initial modifier starts with initial modifier that consists of only a noun or a noun plus modifiers, then that also must describe the following subject. So this is just a noun, a survivor, and then I mean of the Holocaust is a modifier. So this is basically just a noun. When you have a modifier like this, you, again, whether you like it or not, you have to be talking about the subject that's here. Now, the thing to notice about this is that some people think that primo levi apostrophe s is good enough. Make sure you know that it's not, okay? Possessives like this function as adjectives. So what the subject here actually is his stories, because primo levi apostrophe s is just a descriptive adjective. So primo levi's stories is actually the subject. That's incorrect because Primo Levi's stories are not a survivor of the Holocaust. Primo Levi himself was. So the way you would fix this would be you need to have Primo Levi himself as the subject. So Primo Levi wrote or told stories, wrote stories that demonstrate a resolute determination in the face of tragedy. Smiley face if that makes sense. Questions, please type them. One more example is this. Fresh from the tree, comma, it was difficult to eat the mangoes because they were not yet ripe. Okay, I think we know what the deal is by this point, so let's just look at it. If we have an initial modifier that consists of an adjective plus, maybe plus other modifiers, then that also must describe the following subject. So fresh is an adjective from the tree. This is not the mangoes. This is one of those special placeholder pronouns that doesn't really stand for anything. So to fix this sentence, we need to have the mangoes here. So the corrected version here would be fresh from the tree, comma, the mangoes were difficult to eat because they were not yet ripe. Okay, smiley face if this makes sense. If not, please ask a question. Okay, let's clean this up a little bit here. Let's make a summary slide. And we'll add one more here. These are all initial modifiers that must apply to the following subject. So and let's just use the same examples that we had before. Alejandro, I'm new here. I would like to know if I can save this session. What you can do is you can view the recording online. These things are all recorded and they're all posted online within about 4 or 5 days of the session. So that's the option that you've got. You can't really save it, but what you can do is go back and view the recording as many times as you really want to. Okay. So we have the first type is starting with ing or with a preposition plus ing. We didn't show you one of those, but if you have in ing or if you have after ing or anything like that, then you need the same rule applies. So this example with coming home from school, the wind blew me off my bike. That's an incorrect version of that. Second one we had starting with past participle. So the example we had there was thrown from a passing car. The blaze ignited. I mean, people can't throw a blaze out of a car. Third example was if the initial modifier is just a noun, or equivalently a noun with modifiers. So, a survivor of the Holocaust. Primo Levi's stories demonstrate a resolute determination. And then finally, an adjective. Again, optionally with other modifiers. So, like this one. If you want OG references, I'll give you a couple that I have handy. These are certainly not all of them. These are just problems that I know basically off the top of my head. If you want to see an example of one that's a noun plus modifiers, you can see OG 12, number 58. Again, we're not allowed to post these things here on the study hall, unfortunately, but we can refer you to the problem numbers. And then if you want an example that uses ing, you can see number 135. Or if you want to see an example of one that has a preposition in front of the ing, then you can see number 79. Those are the ones that I have off the top of my head here. Okay, check those out on your own time. Again, we can't write those here in the study hall. So, okay, and then the last one that I want to show you, which wasn't on the previous slide, is unlike, or like or unlike. So, for example, this is another incorrect sentence. If you see unlike Indian food, spices, large quantities of spices are uncommon in Colombian food. This is also incorrect, because if you say unlike Indian food, you need to be comparing that to Colombian food, not spices. So this is also incorrect. In order to correct this, you would have to say unlike Indian food, comma, Colombian food does not commonly use large quantities of spices. Okay. Smiley face if these things make sense. If you have questions, please type them. Otherwise, we will start looking at problems. Okay. A quick source citation before we get started here. Um, source citation, all of the following problems have been taken from the GMAT prep software. The GMAT prep software is free, so there's not the copyright issue that the OG has. So you can feel free to submit problems from the GMAT prep software. Again, if you are going to, then please make sure that you ask a general question about the problem. But yeah. Okay, let's take a look at the following problem. Go for it. Here's what we're going to do, by the way, just to make sure we're all on the same page with this. The way this works is you should see to your left, you should see polling options that look like this. You should see these choices that are A, B, C, D, and E. Those are right here. Please do not indicate your answer in the text box. Please indicate your answer with these polling buttons. Thank you. Okay, here's a timer. Go for it. Okay, that's the end of 1:20. So please try to indicate an answer. Remember with these problems, guys, we should be able to solve these at a relatively rapid pace because you do sort of have a head start here. So given that we know that there's a theme of the day, which is these initial modifiers, that means that it shouldn't take you as long as sentence corrections would normally take you. And sentence corrections should normally take you between something like 1 minute and 1:20. So you should be solving these in about 1 minute. So, okay. Also, one gentleman had a question about other forms of INGs. I honestly don't know all this terminology that you're using, but the only INGs that can, I mean, verbs can't be initial in a sentence. Like, you can't start a sentence with a verb. So the only INGs that you can start a sentence with are these modifiers. So yeah, all of the ones that you can put in an initial position, yes. Okay, here is the class polling results. We have one person named Raj and one person named Chirag who didn't answer the problem. Remember, if you're not answering the problems, remember that you have to on the GMAT. There's no such thing as not answering. So if you let yourself not answer the problems, then you are not preparing for this test. Okay, here's the class responses. Pretty clear majority in favor of E. Let's talk about it. We have an initial modifier that says performing a risky maneuver that required precision flying. That's an initial ING modifier. So when you have a initial modifier that starts with ING, you need to be talking about the following subject. So who needs to be there? I mean, again, you should be able to use the meaning of the sentence to predict these things. Like when you see this, you shouldn't need to pick through the choices to figure it out. So what should be here? Text box, please. Yeah, it needs to be people. It needs to be astronauts. So this must be the people who performed the maneuver. And I mean, again, you should have the meaning of the sentence in hand when you do this stuff. Remember that when you first read the prompt, that's all you should really be focusing on is meaning. So you should understand this meaning well. So we need people this is not people, this is not people, and this is not people. So from that consideration alone, we can eliminate A, B, and C. Okay. Between D and E, long story short, there's a redundancy in choice D. You don't use both simultaneously and while, because you don't want two words that say the same thing. So you've got, this is redundant. For instance, you wouldn't say annual salary per year. You would either say annual salary or say salary per year, but you would not say both annual and per year. In this case, it's kind of like the same thing, both simultaneously and while are conveying the meaning of simultaneity, and that's not okay. So, I mean, as far as redundancy goes, as far as how to detect redundancy, the easiest way to find it is to notice when words disappear, because it's not realistic to expect that you would find every redundant construction by itself. But what you should notice is in comparing these two things, you're like, oh, look, there's a while here, and there's not one here. So that should get you thinking, maybe I don't need that after all. Okay, main relevance of this problem to today, again, this whole thing with performing at the start of the sentence, that has to be talking about whoever is after that. Questions about this, please type them in the text box. Otherwise, we will move on. Give me a smiley face if you're ready to move on. Okay, looks like we have one person with a question, so we'll wait for that. It's one person typing, so we'll wait to see what they're typing. Is retrieved and avoided. Yes, those are in parallel, because you have and simultaneously here. So you have two actions, retrieved and avoided, that are in parallel. It is possible that you could express that with a modifier, because if avoiding is that could work both ways. You could say retrieved and avoided in parallel, which is how it's done here. But you could also say something like retrieved while avoiding being rear-ended. So both of those would be legitimate. But yes, in this construction, this is written as two parallel actions. Okay, let's move on to this problem. Again, please answer the problem with the buttons. So these buttons right here, the ones that appear at the left. Okay, let me put a timer on the screen. There you go. Okay, please indicate an answer to this problem. Okay, looks like most people have. Here are the statistics. Okay, again, when you have these initial modifiers, they have to modify the following subject. They have to be talking about the following subject. So this is another one that starts with ing. So this is exceeding even the figures predicted by the most optimistic analysts. So tell me, please, in the text box, what is the only thing that can reasonably exceed other figures? Yeah, a couple people are saying the company. It's not the company, because exceeding some figures is a mathematical inequality. So the only thing that can exceed figures is other figures that are greater. So the following subject must be other figures. So in other words, something else that's numerical, because you say, like, exceeding figures means greater than these other numbers. So we have to be talking about other numbers. So the company is not numbers, so the ones that start with the company are incorrect. The company's earnings are earnings. Remember that Primo Levi's stories is not Primo Levi, that's the stories. Similarly, the company apostrophe S earnings refers to the earnings, not the company. So these two are what we want. Because those are the only two that actually are something that can exceed other numbers. So these are identical until we get to the end of the sentence. So let's see how this fits into the larger picture of the sentence. If you have choice D, it says more than double the previous quarter versus more than double those of the previous quarter. So what we want is you have to make sure that your comparison makes sense. So the problem with D is that D says double the previous quarter itself, which is not okay, because you can't take a quarter and multiply it by 2, a quarter being a period of time. Instead, what you need is you need double the earnings of the previous quarter. So this is a correct comparison. Here's a pronoun. This pronoun refers to earnings. So E is correctly saying that the company's earnings were more than twice as much as the previous earnings. D is mistakenly saying that the company's earnings were somehow twice as much as a period of time, which is not a comparison that makes sense. Okay. You could also have said those in the previous quarter, yes. That would also work, because you could say the earnings in the previous quarter. All right, someone else is typing something. Let's wait. That's what I just addressed a second ago. That would also be correct if you wrote double of those in the previous quarter. I mean, if it makes sense when you substitute in for the pronoun, it works. So you could say the earnings of the previous quarter or their earnings in the previous quarter. Those would both be legitimate. You could also say their earnings during the previous quarter. I mean, there are lots of ways that you could write this. Okay. Let's move on to another one. Clear out your answers, and there you go. Again, please indicate your answers with those polling buttons. Okay, go for it. If you have not indicated an answer, please indicate one in the next 10 seconds. Thank you. Okay, let's talk about it. We still have, Chirag still doesn't have an answer indicated. So if that's you, please pick one. Remember, the GMAT doesn't allow you not to. Okay, thank you. All right, here are the results. All right, well, we're looking at strong majority in favor of A. It's good news. Let's take a look. Blaming its recent troubles on a widening recession and slow rate of technology spending. That is an ing initial modifier. So we need to know who's blaming its troubles on this stuff. This must refer to the company itself, not the announcement. Because the announcement can't blame. The announcement doesn't have troubles. So the ones that say the announcement are illogical because they say that the announcement itself has troubles that it's blaming on something. On the other hand, the ones that refer to the company itself make sense. So there you go. Quickly go through those three options and take a look at them. What the meaning of the sentence. Remember that you want to figure out the meaning of the sentence first. The meaning of the sentence here is that the company announced two things. The first thing that it announced was that it was going to cut. It would cut 10% of its workforce. The second thing that the company announced is that it expected to report a loss for the third quarter. So these things should be parallel because they are parallel meanings. There are two announcements of equal priority in the sentence. So whenever you have the company announced this and that, or this thing and that thing, these should be parallel. So if you have choice A, here's your and. You've got two verbs. You've got verb, verb, would cut, and expected to report. Verb, verb. Those are parallel. Here, the parallel structure is, in choice B, the parallel structure is not between the right things. Like if you look at the parallel structure in choice B, the things that they've put in parallel are announced and expected. These aren't the right items. I mean, what the meaning of the sentence, which you can tell by reading it at first, is the company announced both of these things. So it wouldn't really make sense if you were, the company announced this and magically we know that they expected that. It only makes logical sense if the company is announcing both of these things. So those are not the things that we want to see in parallel. Same thing with C. We have the same issue here with, here's your and. The parallel structures are the company announced and it expected. I mean, that's grammatically parallel, but again, it creates an illogical sentence. It creates a sentence where the company is only announcing one thing, and we somehow magically know the other one. So, same illogical meaning as the previous choice. Okay, a couple of questions in a text box. We'll look at that in a second. Let me point out one more thing as well, which is another meaning issue. That's this. Expected a reported loss is not the right meaning either, because the company itself is who is going to report the loss. So if you say expected a reported loss, this seems to suggest that the loss will be reported by someone else. It's kind of like, if I say I have a handmade item. It's kind of like a reported loss, a handmade item. This strongly suggests that the item was handmade by somebody else. So if I handmade the item myself, I would want to say something like I made the item by hand. So I have to use a verb that really suggests that I did this. So same sort of thing. A does this correctly. The company announced this, and the company also expected to report a loss itself. It expected to do that. Whereas in choices B and C, it expected a loss magically reported by somebody else. Kind of like a handmade item. Okay, the questions. There would be. This is not a problem from the standpoint of grammar. I mean, you can say they announced that there would be something. Again, it's the same kind of issue of indirectness, though. Like the problem with there would be a cut sounds like it's just magically there, and they're not the ones doing it. So it's in order to convey the true meaning of the sentence, you do need to have the company as the subject of these things. The company announced that it would do this itself, as opposed to there would be a cut is not grammatically wrong. I mean, it's perfectly well written. It just doesn't mean what we want to say. It means that there would just magically be a cut by pure magic. Someone saying passive, I mean, no, this is not passive, but passive is not an error. So if you think that the passive voice is wrong, this is not the passive voice anyway. But if you think that the passive voice is an error, make sure that you get rid of that idea right now, because it's not. Passive voice is just as good as any other verb form. Okay. Someone asked about cutting. It's not incorrect. Again, it still has the same kind of issue as these other things that we've been talking about. Like they announced the cutting of its workforce doesn't really convey the idea that they are the ones doing it. So you still have the same issue as these other things. Like there would be a cut, a reported loss, the cutting of its workforce. All of these things totally fail to convey the idea that the company is actually doing all of these things, which should be clear from context. Okay, questions other than those? If not, we will move on to another one. Let's take a look. Okay, let's hit up another problem here. How about this one? Clear out your answers. Here's a timer. Go for it. Okay, let's pick something in the next 10 or 15 seconds, guys. Thanks. Okay, so we have answers from just about everybody. Chirag, again, we haven't heard from you, so remember you got to pick something. Go ahead and click again. Okay, there you go. Click again. Remember, guys, only click once. If you click twice, it'll actually turn off your answer. So, okay, here. Maybe that's what's happening with Chirag. Yeah, you're good. So the one here that shows up as nobody is me. Okay. Here are our results. Pretty strong majority in favor of D. Let's go ahead and take a look. Correct answer is D. Let's see why. But first of all, you've got unlike most severance packages. Notice that the rest of this is part of the modifier as well, because which is referring to severance packages. So all of that is one giant initial modifier. I mean, technically it's a modifier that also has another smaller modifier inside it. Like the modifier is unlike the other packages, but then you have which blah, 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 describing the other packages. So smiley faces, that makes sense. That whole thing inside the red box is an initial modifier. Smiley faces, that makes sense. Okay, good stuff. So, well, we need to say, and remember that unlike is on our list of modifiers. So it's the same rules that we have here for everything else. So what is unlike most severance packages? Well, what's unlike most severance packages is this other severance package. So this must apply to another severance package. So that eliminates everything except for D and E, because The subject of A is workers, the subject of B is workers, and the subject of C is the company. So these are not things that are unlike severance packages. This is the automobiles company's severance package, and this is like Primo Levi's stories. It's apostrophe S is a descriptive adjective. So this is the package, and this is also the package. So the only choices with a modifier that works are D and E. Does this make sense? Smiley face if it does. Okay, the difference between D and E is the last scheduled day versus the last day that they are scheduled to collect. The problem with E is that it sounds like they are trying to collect days. Like, let me give you an example of what is wrong with E by giving you an example of a correct structure that is written the same way. If you have something like this, the next book that the class is required to read is unavailable at the bookstore. So notice the way that this works when you have this kind of construction. The next book that the class is required to read, this construction implies that the class has to read the book. So this works here because that's really what we mean. The class is required to read the book. So same thing, if you want to use the word collect, then you can say the trash that the collectors, that the workers are scheduled to collect must be left out on the curb. So this, again, this works. The trash that these people are scheduled to collect. They are actually scheduled to collect the trash. So this works. They are actually scheduled to collect the trash. Not true up here, though, unfortunately. These people are not scheduled to collect days. So the intended meaning doesn't work with what's written here. There's one exception to this, not to derail the discussion too much here, but there is one type of construction that you can write in this way that is not the object of a verb. Let me show you what that is. What's that doing there? Okay. The one exception to this structure that I can think of right now is if you have idea or notion or concept, etc. here in this spot. So let me give you an example to that. An example of that, sorry. Here's an example. If you have something like the idea that students are supposed to clean their classrooms is common in some countries. So if this word is idea or notion or something like that, then it's not, people are not cleaning an idea. This is different. If you have this kind of word, like an idea or a notion or a concept or something like that, then this is the idea. But if you have a concrete word like book or trash, that blah, 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 blah is doing, then that's the object of the action. The book that I read, I'm reading the book. The date that I planned the date. The next book that the class is required to read, the class is required to read the book. So this one doesn't have that problem. Questions here. If you have a question, please in the text box. Otherwise, we'll move on to something else. Okay, good stuff. Let's look at another one. Let's try this. Clear out your answers. I notice we have a couple of new attendees here, so if you are just joining us, make sure you know that you should indicate your answers with these answer buttons that appear at your left. Okay, try this. Okay, hold on about 15 or 20 seconds, sorry. Okay, guys, sorry about that delay. Here are your polling statistics. Let's take a look. All right. So if we have this, unlike the other major planets, remember that unlike is one of these modifiers that has to be talking about the following subject. So what or who is unlike the other major planets? Text box, please indicate. Yeah, what is unlike the other major planets? So it has to be a major planet. So, because if you say unlike all of the other of anything, then there has to be a comparison between things that are in that category. So you got to be comparing Pluto to another planet. So a couple of you fell for this one. A couple of you picked things that are talking about the orbit. The orbit is not a planet. Pluto is. So the only viable comparison here is another planet. So let's see, the people who picked the wrong comparison, most of you are people who are late to the session, which would help explain stuff here. But okay, so based on the comparison, using that comparison, we can eliminate the ones that are not Pluto. Pluto's orbit is not Pluto, the orbit of Pluto is not Pluto, and the orbit of Pluto is not Pluto. So these three are incorrect. These two are actually Pluto. Pluto is unlike the other major planets. So that leaves you with A and B. As far as the differences between A and B, there's not really a lot of differences. We have the which versus a parallel structure. So the question is, which one of these do we want? Text box, any thoughts on that, on the differences between A and B? Okay, yeah, if you look at orbit, if you look at which, rather, sorry, which is modifying orbit. A couple of you wrote which should modify the orbit. I think you're thinking the right thing. You're maybe not using the right words for it. But the intended meaning of which is to talk about the planet itself, because which is closer to the sun should be talking about Pluto itself, because closer to the sun than Neptune is. So this should modify Pluto, because we're talking about closer to the sun than another planet is. So we got to be talking about a planet. But the actual rule here is that which refers to the noun that's here. So unfortunately, which is talking about the orbit and not about Pluto. So this is incorrect for that reason. One commenter says which is inaccurate. If that's what you mean by inaccurate, then yes. And one other commenter notes correctly enough. Actually, I think the whole Pluto not being a planet anymore thing, I heard somewhere that they took that back and that Pluto is now a planet again. But maybe not. I don't know. So there you have it. So this one is B like boy. Any questions, please type them in the text box. Otherwise, we'll move on to something else. Okay, let's do another one. Try this. Again, if you are relatively new to this session, please indicate your answer with the polling buttons. Thank you very much. Timer. Okay, let's set it to a minute left. There's your timer. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's pick answers, please. Give you about another 10 seconds to do that. Okay, I think most people have answers selected here. So let's take a look. This one starts again with unlike. So unlike other Mayan cities, I think we know the drill by now, but let's look at it. The initial modifier is unlike other Mayan cities. So we have to be comparing this to an actual other Mayan city. So let's take a look. Modifier must refer to another city. So Cancun apostrophe S, remember, is not Cancun. So here's the statistics from the polling. Remember that Cancun apostrophe S does not count as Cancun. Make sure you know this. Primo Levi apostrophe S is not Primo Levi, etc. So this is not Cancun, this is commercial power. This is also commercial power, and this is also commercial power. So all three of these are incorrect, because you cannot compare cities to the power that some other city had. So it seems like a couple of you had B as your first answer, but apparently there are no B's left in the polling statistics. So whoever did that must have changed their answer. Okay, as far as D versus E, I'll give you the quick version of this, and then we'll move on to one more problem. In fact, we only have one more problem after this, so we can finish a little bit early today. Here's this, D versus E. The first is this, and then let's also look at which. The first one is seemed. Seemed is not realistic. Like, what the meaning of the sentence is, this is the way that it seems now. But we're talking about what happened then. So what you need is you need to have verb tenses or modifier forms that correctly indicate this change of time frame. So we need a construction that recognizes both of these things. That puts both of these in the proper time frames. So let's look at what's in the sentence. Seemed is incorrect because it's not how it seemed back then. It's how it seems to us now. Because it doesn't make sense to use seemed in the past time frame here, because nothing would have had to seem like anything to anyone back then. Like back then, it just was what it was, and there was no issue of seeming like this or not seeming like this. On the other hand, this does that properly. Seems now to have used. This is an infinitive that refers you to the past. So this is also correct. Let's also talk about the which really quickly. The which, what was a source of jade, obsidian, and other valuable communities? Please tell me in the text box. Like, remember, all of this revolves around understanding the meaning of the sentence. So in context, what was the source of jade and obsidian and other commodities? Text box, please. Yeah, exactly. Like this modifier, the highlands were. This modifier needs to be talking about the highlands themselves, because the green modifier needs to recognize the highlands themselves, not the strategic position. Were the source of these things. So the problem is, we need a which that points to highlands. This seems to do that, but then the issue is that it's which was. So this would require a singular verb. You can't say the highlands which was. It would have to be the highlands which were. Notice that choice E gets around this issue altogether by using a positive. They just say highlands, comma, a source of. So that works. This doesn't work. This modifier is incorrect. Other questions about this is one more question in the text box. In becoming. In becoming is not necessarily incorrect here. You can have in ing this if you're discussing something that was part of some other process. So I wouldn't call that an error. I mean, there's a slight difference in meaning. If you say they used this in becoming a power, it means that they used it during the process of becoming a power. Versus they used this to become a power, it implies that that was their end goal later on. So it's really a matter of what you mean, but I would not really call that I wouldn't call that a genuine error. All right, let's look at one more. That's this one. Let's try this, clear out your answers. Here's your timer. This will be the last problem of the day. Go for it. Okay, there's still a number of you without answers to this, so let's wait another 15 seconds or so. Please pick something. Thank you. Okay, we are, let's see, there's a tomato who does not have an answer, and it looks like that's it. So please pick something if that's you. Remember, the GMAT doesn't allow you not to pick answers, so please pick one. There you go. Okay, here are your statistics. Right there. A decade after is still, notice that a decade after, the decade part here is modifying after. So if I say after doing this versus 3 hours after doing this, this is just telling how far after. So in our list of things here, this is still a preposition plus ing after doing this. Preposition ing. So if we look at that, that's one of our initial modifiers. So this needs to apply to the following subject. So who or what, please tell me in the text box, who or what actually initiated the nation's most comprehensive and aggressive anti-smoking program? Please tell me in the text box. Okay, yeah, it should be California itself and not anything else. So, I mean, per capita consumption did not initiate a program. California apostrophe S is not California. So again, this is still consumption. But these are California. So this consideration rules out A, B, and C. So take note, it looks like a few people picked C this time. Remember that apostrophe S's are not nouns. They count as adjectives. They are used to describe other things. So if you're looking for California, you have to actually find California and not California apostrophe S. Very important. Okay. So we are down to D and E. Anybody in the text box want to take a shot at explaining the difference between D and E? I mean, when I say explain, I mean actually explain. So like some people are just quoting things, but not really explaining, not even saying whether they think those things are right or wrong, much less actually explaining them. Again, by explain, I mean actually explain. So if you don't just say a drop more than, like tell me what you think about that. Okay. Yeah, the problem is with E. The problem is this. Like we have this modifier where we need to be more explicit about what this is. Now, I mean, the clear meaning of the sentence is that it went down by over twice as much. So it's the drop that is more than twice as much. So the meaning should be that the drop per capita is per person, yeah. So it's per, as opposed to an overall number. Meaning should be that the drop is twice or was twice as great. That's not conveyed here. Because this choice makes it look like 60 is more than twice as great as something. Whereas this is explicit about the fact that the drop is more than twice as much. So, there you go. That's one error there. The other error is another redundancy error. Does anybody see the redundancy in choice E? Remember the examples we gave of redundancy before. For example, if you say annual salary per year, that's redundant and therefore incorrect. Yeah, annual per capita is not redundant. A couple of you are saying that. Annual and per capita are two completely different things, so that's not redundant. But because I mean, you know, if something is per capita, then it's not necessarily per year, and if something is per year, it's not necessarily per capita. So, to the gentleman saying annual per capita, no, annual per capita is totally fine. But what's redundant is when you have two expressions that are saying exactly the same thing, and that's what per capita and per person are doing, because that's what per capita means. Like, per capita means per person. So this is the same thing as saying, like, it's just like saying annual salary was X amount of dollars per year. This is incorrect. You would either want to say the annual salary was X dollars, or you would say the salary was X dollars per year. Same thing, you could say annual per capita consumption was this many packs. Notice that's what the correct answer does. Or you could say the consumption went down from this many packs per person, but you don't say both per capita and per person. Okay, the main point of today is the modifier part. I mean, the rest of these are auxiliary lessons, and when you do study this stuff, make sure you do prioritize accordingly. Like, make sure that you know what is more important and what is less important. But the main focus of today was these modifiers. Everything else is auxiliary. If you have super quick questions, I can take them. I do have to go really soon, as in basically right now. But if anyone has questions that are very fast, I can take those. Good luck if this is your last study hall before you take the test. Okay. The questions are submitted on the same page where it's on the main Thursdays with Ron page. That's where the submission form is located. If you still have trouble finding that, then talk to Student Services. I don't know what the topic is the next session until about an hour before the next session. So, yeah. I mean, it's based on the submissions. Okay, guys, thank you very much. Alejandra, I actually just answered that. It's on the front page of Thursdays with Ron. So it's the web page where you first found out about this in the first place. Okay, we're gonna kill the recording. Let's stop. Have a good 2 weeks.